Yes, sir.
So, first of all, you're submitting that this amendment restores the status quo ante. In other words, returns the power to the legislature, which it previously had.
Correct.
Secondly, the language is pretty broad, and the fears of the, won't necessarily say home rule crowd, is that the power that you give to the legislature can just as easily be used for bad ends as it can be for good ends. In other words, we think, based on being Republicans, that we've got the good guys in there right now.
Right.
What if the right and the duty to create those funding mechanisms and address disparities turn into a statewide tax of some sort from the legislature?
Thank you for that question. The way I would sort of summarize the question is, does this language enable mischief to be created by others who don't see the delivery of education the way we see it as Republicans, conservatives, and all? And the answer is the status quo ante allowed for that, too. In other words, what pre-existed Claremont was the ability of the legislature to come in and do all sorts of things quite differently than we had. They moved local control, frankly. All this does is restores that decision back to the legislature so that whoever we elect is responsible to us as our elected representatives, and they could do something different than we like. But that's the system that we're establishing, and at least it's not the court, it's the legislature. And the legislature can take actions with the people, and it puts it back in the political process rather than a judicial one. Yes, ma'am.
How would this affect the private, the homeschooling, and the charter schools?
Thank you. That's a very good question. It does not affect them at all. I mean, it doesn't. Right now, the Claremont decisions don't really reach homeschooling, private schools, and all. They're outside of the mandate. The Constitution here really addresses public schools, and our amendment is specific to public education. If you look at the last two words in that amendment, yeah. So the focus here is when it comes to public education, the state then can have the full power and authority to delegate educational design, curriculum development, and all, and the funding of it. Private education stands outside of that because the funding for private education is whatever the people who are involved with it would choose to use, and same thing with homeschooling.
Aren't charter schools somehow
yes.
associated with the, I think you have to accept the charter schools, right, and they have to have rules and regulations?
Correct. Charter schools are quasi-public schools.
Yeah.
They're a creature of the legislative enactment. That's why I mentioned earlier, I worked in 1993 and 1994, 1995 legislative session to pass this charter school legislation, which gave rise to this. It's a creature of state law. And what it does is it sort of works outside of the traditional public school model, as you know. And we really have we need to do a better job, and we need to modernize that charter school law so it's more flexible and allows for more opportunities for charter schools. But this would allow the state to actually give more freedom, more control at the local level over charter schools than theoretically you get under Claremont. And there has never been any litigation brought about charter schools per se, but with the existing Claremont jurisprudence, I think you could see some real mischief being created unless we change the Constitution in this fashion on the issue of charter schools.
Thank you.
Yes.
A while back, several years back, we had a home rule ordinance that came to a vote. And is whatever this is doing going to get crashed on the same argument as the old home rule proposal did?
I don't recall what the home rule proposal was that was before the voters.
I can't recite it.
Yeah, but I don't believe this will have any. It won't be subject to that sort of criticism in a sense. I mean, it may be because some people say I don't want this because I want home rule too. I say let's take this first step at least to right the ship of state about educational funding and adequacy and educational operations, and we can talk about home rule as a separate matter. We can really have our cake and eat it too separately, but this is not embody home rule as I understand home rule to be and what it was before the voters. The opposition will be from the left. There are those in the Democratic and liberal establishment who believe that Claremont is right because it's going to take us to a broad-based tax. The court, make no mistake about it, the court wanted the state of New Hampshire to enact a broad-based tax when it came to education. And if you look at other states that have had education funding litigation like this, they've labored under this for 30, 40 years, to the point where, and I believe it's Washington, the Supreme Court there ruled, and the legislature actually had to enact a statute that said, if school district A, which is a wealthy school district so-called, spends more than the average expenditure, they have to put, for every dollar over that average, you have to put $2 into a general account that'll be redistributed to other school districts. They penalize school districts for spending more than the average. That is not American, and it's certainly not New Hampshire. And I understand there's some communities that may not be as able to raise the dollars, but with a proper algorithmic formula, you can give them the resources to get to where they need to be. But the decisions about, how much to build and all that should be made locally. That's the New Hampshire way. Yes, sir.
How you doing? Steve Durgan.
Hi, Steve.
Yeah, I'm just curious, do you think there was even ever a problem at all when the initial Claremont 1 decision came through? What's your feeling in terms of, the infrastructure and the money that was there and the head count in terms of staffing and stuff?
Right. Let me just answer it this way. At the time Claremont 1 was decided, I thought Claremont 1 was really an articulation of what the Constitution provided, which is a duty on the state to provide adequate education, guarantee adequate funding. It was we have educational enterprise is imperfect, always can be improved, but it was a good system, and it is a good system. And the Superior Court found such and ruled in our favor. It's the Supreme Court that has sort of superimposed its own judgment about the system we should have, how it should be funded, and so forth.
Yeah, because my basic take on it is we're trying to impose a solution on a problem that didn't initially exist.
I don't think it existed, although, again, there are those who take a very different view about how to fund programs, whether it's education, law enforcement, or fire protection. The state ought to have an income tax and redistribute the wealth. You do that, and that broad-based tax is going to kill us in terms of New Hampshire advantage, because it takes away from the people at the site where decisions should be made about law enforcement, fire protection, and education, the ability to make payments and make a value judgment. And once you go to a broad-based tax, then it doesn't matter anymore. Somebody else is going to pay for it. That's how we feel. That's how the people in other states felt. And Connecticut is a classic example of a state that went to a broad-based tax thinking they could lower a property tax. Well, they haven't. Property tax there went right back up, and they're one of the highest taxed per capita states in the country, and they're having a more severe economic recession because of it.
And New Jersey.
New Jersey. And thank you, Chris Christie, for trying to rake the ship of state there. Let's not have that problem. They're fighting about whether they want to go down from whatever the income tax rate is by a couple percentage points. We don't want an income tax at all. If you allow Claremont lawsuit to stay the way it is and not amend this Constitution, there's going to come a day when that's going to be the argument that people will take. That is, we need to have a broad-based tax. Yes, sir.
Could you just clarify how it's un-American for District A in Washington State to have to pay what amounts to an excise tax to District B, or broadly Districts B through Z, if we're just talking about dollars that go through the public school system channels? All of the parents in that school District A can do tutoring, private education, supplementing the public education. So I don't see how it's un-American.
It may not be un-American, but what I do think it is, it's punitive. I don't see why it is that one community should be told you can't spend more than the average. And if you do...
They can.
Well, they can, but then they have to pay in...
A tax.
They pay an excise tax. That's taking money away from that community for the decisions it chooses to make. If you have two comparable communities, for example, that are fairly equal in terms of fiscal capacity, one decides it doesn't want a gym in its school. The other one says it does. They spend more money. That should be their decision.
Okay, so the point is an excessive excise tax is un-American.
I think it's fundamentally, yes. I mean, that's the way I would look at it.
Okay.
We need to be responsible for the decisions we made locally, and we pay for them on our own. We shouldn't be taxing a school district or a community that chooses to spend more money on any program and force them to pay an excise tax. It forces them to make decisions that aren't. I think
one more question over here.
So Rye is a donor town. If we don't pass CACR12, what happens? We go back to what situation?
Yes, if we don't pass the CACR12, you're going to continue to, I think, labor under the threat of more and more donor towns and the recipient towns and a redistribution of wealth. This is what it comes down to. I still think the decisions in Rye are to be made by the people in Rye and working with their local educational leaders, And that is truly local control. It should not be the state that tells you how much you can spend, where you can spend it. You should tell yourselves that and make the decision here. And I think that's the New Hampshire way that we've succeeded under prior to Claremont, and the way we ought to be. And there's going to be support from Governor Lynch and from other leaders in our legislature and in other parts of our community that it will support this. The business community supports this. And I hope you will support it as well. Our website is ovid2012.com, O-V-I-D-E. Don't forget the E on the end of Ovid. I hope I can earn your support for this campaign, and I certainly hope I can earn your support for this constitutional amendment if it makes its way on the ballot. If it doesn't, you can be assured that I will work with the legislature, if I'm elected governor, to put a properly worded amendment that deals with this problem and once and for all. And I think that's really important for New Hampshire's future. God bless you, God bless America, and God bless the great
Grok TV.